this is week 2, part 2 of our lecture. And the last slide that we left on was formal assessment. And so now we're going to discuss concerns. Test abuse. Instructional decisions should never be made strictly from formal assessment. So they should be followed up with informal measures and formative assessment. So never just do one measure. We should always be collecting an assortment of data. Gross simplification. Treat reading process as aggregates of isolated skills versus a holistic process. So we know that reading is a holistic constructive process. Tests that focus on isolated skills may not be a true reflection of the student's reading abilities. Poor generalizability. Are tasks authentic? Do they provide multiple opportunities for the reader? So when we discuss about tasks being authentic, some formal assessments have a short passage to read followed by multiple choice questions. But that is not how a student reads. Students usually don't read a short passage. Usually there's more of an experience, an article or a book, and then they're answering questions. So those are things to think about, as we make evaluations about our student. Are we giving them multiple opportunities to show their reading abilities? Test fairness. Tests are always culture-bound, presence of bias in the test content. So if you kind of think back, some of the standardized tests in the past have really emphasized culture and values that are more familiar to the white middle class. So, students who are minorities may not understand the content that is being presented because of their culture, not necessarily because of their reading abilities. Okay, so characteristics to consider when looking at formal assessments. You're going to want to look at the title, the author. So you might even want to ask yourself, is this a person that is a trusted authority figure in reading? Are they well known by his or her expertise? Okay, publisher, date of publication, and we want to make sure that the assessments reflect current theories of reading development. Level of difficulty, and this is an important one because we don't want to choose material that is too difficult for our student because this can have a negative impact on him or her. And type of administration. Okay, some more characteristics with formal assessment is criterion referenced. Okay, so also known as standard-based testing or assessment, how well a person has learned a specific body of knowledge. So this is kind of like the CST. It attempts to assess things, and it usually indicates a level of mastery. So a student must achieve a certain score. Kind of a good example of that is if you think of a driver's test, there's a minimum requirement to pass and earn a license. So like CST, there's a minimum requirement to be proficient in that area. So usually these kind of tests are high stakes. Norm reference ones are measurements of individuals standing within a group, how they compare to their peers. These are generally reported as a percentage or percentile ranking. So if they performed 90% in the 90% percentile, then they are better than 90% of their peers. Standardize. All students perform under the same conditions. And this is kind of one that we need to really think about because unfortunately not everyone may need the same condition. So we might need someone in our class who needs modifications or accommodations. So also something to consider. Okay, so when you're giving an assessment or you're evaluating an assessment, it's important to evaluate different aspects. So we're going to go over some terms and you're going to hear validity and reliability throughout our course. Okay, so this is the appropriateness, usefulness, and the meaningfulness of inferences made from test scores. Content validity refers to content of the test questions, formatting, wording, content sampling, etc. So we want to make sure that the content matches the instructional objectives. Criterion validity. This refers to test results are comparable to other tests and predicts performance on future measures. Okay, so an example of this would be if the end of the year math test in 4th grade highly correlated with the statewide math test, then they would have a high concurrent validity. Construct validity measures what the test intends to measure. So, is the test measuring what is purported to measure? Consequential validity. Indirect consequences of using the assessment, so teaching to the test. And this is kind of a lot, I heard a lot with the California state test, how a lot of the teachers were teaching to the test. So the consequence was that maybe they didn't go in depth with the content. So that would be a consequence of using the assessment. Okay, another one is reliability. Okay, reliability is the consistency, stability of test scores or amount of random error apparent. Okay, when I think of reliability, think of it as your car. We enjoy having a reliable car because it is consistent. It starts every time. So just like that, we strive to have reliable, consistent instruments to measure student achievement. So here are some things to consider as well. Are there distractions when your student is taking the test? This can also affect their performance, therefore affecting the results of the test. Is the student fatigued, tired, or not trying? Stability. Same test administered twice will yield the same results. Test, retest reliability. Alternate forms, equivalents. 2 forms of tests yield the same results. So this kind of refers to if you gave one test and then you gave another test that was very similar with the same content and they yield the same results, that would have high reliability. Okay, so these are kind of difficult terms to understand, validity and reliability, and we'll go over that a little bit more, and we'll do a little bit practice. Okay, so here's a good analogy with the bullseye. So looking at our first bullseye, this is reliable, not valid, and the reason why it's reliable is because we have this cluster here which shows that the shots were consistent. And remember we said reliability refers to the consistency or the stability of test scores. Okay, here we have low validity and low reliability. And the reason why is because look at how the shots are all scattered and there's none near the target. And another one, not reliable, not valid. So they're kind of just all spread out over here. And here we have the bullseye where they're both reliable and valid. And this is kind of what we want our assessments to be. We want it to be both reliable and valid. And usually, or when it's valid, it is always reliable. So we have a cluster here and it's meeting the target. Okay, so let's practice. Okay, question. An assessment requires students to read words in isolation, and you are using it to infer reading ability. Is this a threat to reliability or validity? Okay, so criterion and or construct validity. Okay, so looking again, this is the assessment requires them to read words in isolation, and that would not be accurate because you cannot get valid results when you're teaching words in isolation on their reading ability. Okay. During your session, the student's parent is sitting in and giving feedback to the child after each question. Is this a threat to reliability or validity? Reliability. So if you were taking the parent out of the room, the child would not perform the same. It wouldn't be consistent with the score before. And our last one. You are giving a student a comprehension assessment that features 2 literal comprehension questions. Is this a threat to validity or reliability? Okay, validity, you can argue that it goes against all types of validity too. And because the 2 literal questions is not a large enough sample size to get an overall good assessment on the student's comprehension. And literal questions do not encompass all of the hierarchy of comprehension questions and types. Okay, so along with assessment, we're going to go over some score types, and there are many different ways to report scores. Percentiles expressed in terms of percentage of persons scoring below a given raw score. And these are usually ranked within 100. And the raw score means the number correct on a test. Standard score is given to a group or category of scores, deviation IQ or Stanines. This is usually given to a group or category of scores. Grade and age equivalent scores based on average scores for students in each of a series of grades expressed in years and months. And this is in decimal form. So for example, the score of 3.4 would indicate that he or she would be 3rd grade, 4th month. So those are usually the kind of scores that I often see. Okay, and so it's really important that you consider requesting to view formal assessment results of your student. So not just your student that you're going to have soon, but also your students in your classroom. You want to use formal assessment to help guide instruction, but again, as mentioned earlier, that's not the only assessment tool you want to use. Okay, and you can look in your book, page 114 and 128 for more examples of formal assessment. Okay, and my 15-minute mark is almost up, so we'll go ahead and go to part 3.